Hi, my name is Sydney, and I have a 2-year-old son that has dyspraxia. And while I'm here, I'm sorry if this microphone makes any weird audio noise. My son dumped liquid on my laptop for the second time, and apparently it broke the mic in that process. So I recorded all this video and then realized I need to do it again so that I can have audio. But my son was diagnosed with dyspraxia about 4 months ago, so it wasn't that long ago that he was diagnosed. And I will point out I have my notes right next to me because this whole process kind of gets confusing. Anyone that's been through this knows it's not easy getting a diagnosis, and with my son only being 2.5, he's extremely young to get this diagnosis. Normally the diagnosis of DCD, Developmental Coordination Disorder, which is a synonym of dyspraxia. The typical age of diagnosis, I believe, is 6, and my son was 2. So a lot of times kids with this, it's because there was a complication with a pregnancy or they're premature or something. That wasn't our case. I had a perfectly healthy pregnancy. My progesterone was low in the first trimester, but I took a pill every day and then I was fine. I was induced. He was born 11 hours later, completely healthy. He was 9 pounds, 8 ounces, 21 1/4 inches long. He was a big baby, but perfectly healthy. He started rolling over at 4 months old. He started sitting at 6. He started crawling at 8. And he was walking at 13, which is a little bit late, but from what we know now and what our pediatrician has told us, in the past like 20, 30 years, the ranges that are considered normal for kids to accomplish developmental milestones has changed to be more inclusive. So some of my son's developmental milestones would be considered late 40-something years ago, but now they're not considered late. So he started walking at 13 months, and something that we've learned through this process is when something physically is happening with the baby, their kind of like mental development may slow down because their body is focusing on one area. So our son was saying bye, dog, and like dad, dad, dad at 8 months old. But then he started crawling, so he stopped talking. This happened again when he started walking. So at 13 months old, he kind of started to talk again, and then he stopped when he started walking, which is completely normal, but he did have 2 regressions. But that's, by the time he was 15 months old, all he was doing was ma, 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 da, 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 which is pretty much the level of about a 6-month-old. So he had a significant delay. So at 15 months old, our pediatrician sent us to have a speech eval, which we've been told is really early for pediatricians to catch on, so we're thankful for that. But I would have taken the help long before, but at least our son was caught in time. And so anyone that's had a speech eval or a kid with a speech delay knows the first thing is you have to have a hearing eval, and then that lets you know if that's what's causing the speech delay, because speech therapy is not going to help your kid if they can't hear. So he went to his first hearing eval and he failed. But they told us that's really common. Kids this age just get bored. And at this point, he was 18 months old. So they had us come back, and we went back actually on Halloween. He had a second eval, and his hearing was perfect. So then they went ahead and had us schedule his speech eval. So then we did our speech eval. He qualified. We started in January. So for those of you keeping track, that was 6 months. In between, there's a speech problem, and we're going to start speech therapy. It takes a minute, and we went with the university that's next to us. So it's the students doing it. They do it with semesters. You got to wait for there to be a semester before you can go in, and that had been, there's a break in December in colleges, so had to wait until January to get in, and at that point he was 21 months. And so he did once a week a group class, and we noticed he didn't really like having another little girl in there. He was more distracted by her than kind of wanting to communicate with her. He just wanted to stare at her and watch her play. So that wasn't helping him at all. And at this point, we are also doing developmental therapy because we live in Tennessee, and in the state of Tennessee, any child under the age of 3 that is diagnosed with at least a 40% developmental delay in any area. So our area was in communication. He was more than 40% delayed. So we qualified for developmental therapy through the state. So once a week, a developmental therapist comes to our home and talks to us. So in this time when my son's doing the speech therapy, we're also seeing a developmental therapist, and we had been making no progress. And she started doing sign language with us, which was a huge blessing. And she told us a lot of times kids this age, once they start occupational therapy, their speech will be a lot better. So we went and we also started at an occupational therapy office, and I hated it there. So we did not stay there long. We went there probably about 2 months until we could get in somewhere else. And so there was a month gap where we didn't have occupational therapy. But then we found another building they're fantastic. So he does occupational therapy there. He was doing developmental therapy at home and speech therapy, and no improvements with his language skills. He was doing better with sign language, but at that point we hadn't really taken off with sign language. So then we were told, next semester we're going to go up to 2 speech therapies a week. So that's what we were going with. But then our speech therapist and our developmental therapist kept telling us that our son seemed very apraxic, had speech apraxia, but they weren't qualified to diagnose it. Hold on, I've got to let my dog outside. So they had, I don't remember the age. I think speech apraxia is normally diagnosed at like 4 or 5, maybe even 6. But our son was definitely too young for that diagnosis, unless you go to someone that's amazing. And we just so happen to be in big enough of a city that we have a doctor that is like known for the speech apraxia diagnosis. And she's about one of the only professionals that will diagnose this young. At least that's what we were told by all our therapists. So we started trying to get in with her, which is also a long process. So eventually in June, so when he was 26 months old, so 5 months after starting speech therapy, we got in to see that doctor. And she did diagnose him with Developmental Coordination Disorder, Dyspraxia, and speech apraxia, but she informed me that's not the correct term because A means none, dys means some. So even though it's commonly used in the therapy world as speech apraxia, that's not the correct term, but it is commonly used. And she also diagnosed him with core weakness, decreased balance, decreased coordination, and decreased sensory processing, including vestibular. And at this point, he wasn't running or jumping, which wasn't crazy delay, but I think he was delayed by like 3 months by not running and jumping. So she changed all of our therapies. So at that point, we had 3 therapy appointments a week, and she changed us to 7. So she had us start hydrotherapy, physical therapy, and moved our speech therapy to 3 times a week. So currently, we do developmental therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy 3 times a week, physical therapy, hydrotherapy, and swim lessons. Because she told us swimming is the absolute best thing you can do about dyspraxia. And the more I've looked online, they say if your kid has dyspraxia, keep them in the water as much as possible because it gives them exercise, it gives them some social when they're on a swim team, and it gives them more body awareness. And with dyspraxia, your kid's not typically going to be a football, basketball, baseball star. They're not going to have that kind of coordination but swimming is something that they can do and kind of excel at, or not, can be more comfortable with. And so that's what we do now. And he's now at 27 signs. So he does a lot of sign language, and he makes noises with the sign language, so it counts as words. He should be at 200 or 300 spoken words right now. So he's about 10% of where he should be. But before, he was kind of at nothing and made no progress. And sign language has been the biggest blessing for us in helping him communicate, because it did give him a lot of frustration to not be able to tell us. Because the thing with dyspraxia is it does not affect intellectually at all. Kids with dyspraxia most of the time do not have any mental disabilities. Like, they are fully capable in understanding you. The problem is oftentimes they're dyslexic. They're going to have problems writing, especially with crossing the midline, and it's a lot harder for them to talk. Well, in America, how do we judge how intelligent you are? It's by how you speak and how you write and how you read, which doesn't give a chance to kids with dyspraxia to really show what they know. Whereas my son, he's so smart with like engineering stuff. You know, you can give him blocks and toys, and he can figure out any lock. It's scary how he figures out locks. We've gone through about 5 different sets in our kitchen. It's ridiculous, but that's the thing with these kids, is they're smart, they just can't show it in the stereotypical ways. Anyway, so that's kind of the timeline of how things happen with our son. And some early warning signs for us were he had really bad motion sickness. So starting at about 12 months old, he would throw up every time we got in the car. And he was backwards facing. As we all know by now, you're supposed to keep your kids backwards as long as possible. Most laws say you can turn them around at 12 months, but most people say just do it as long as they fit. So we had him backwards facing, and he just threw up every time, and he had a really sensitive gag reflex. So he'd choke like every time, and I was scared he was going to die. So by 13, 14 months old, maybe even a little bit later, he was flipped around, and that kind of stopped the motion sickness. We now know the reason that was so bad is because he has a very sensitive vestibular system. And so had we known that, we would have done the same thing, but it was a warning sign. And in February 2018, he got very sick. He was 22 months old, and he got into some stuff he shouldn't have, and he was in the hospital for 4 days. In those 4 days, a social worker came in, which I thought she was coming in to like say we're bad parents or something. But she was just coming in because he had been in the hospital twice before, and it had been in like I guess about less than a year, maybe 6-month period. But the thing was, he would fall every day, and he threw up a lot, and he had a really sensitive gag reflex. Well, they tell you if your kid falls and throws up, take him to the hospital. So since he fell every day and he threw up all the time, when they went together, I took him to the hospital, and every time they said he's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with him. But we now know the reason he fell is because of the dyspraxia. But she just came in, and the social worker came in, and she started asking us questions if we were worried about his development and the gait or how he walks. No, he's just a clumsy kid, which is the definition of dyspraxia. We didn't know that. We're just like, he's a toddler. Toddlers toddle. They fall over. It's not a big deal. I was a nanny twice, and I volunteered at a daycare. I've been around kids. It's not crazy for them to fall. Little did I know they're not supposed to fall that much. But that was also a warning for us, and us being ignorant and not knowing about dyspraxia. Like, he's fine. We're not worried about him. You know, he's just a clumsy kid. Didn't worry about the motion sickness. A lot of people have motion sickness. It's not a big deal. He had 2 speech regressions, but they told us, that's kind of normal. But when they're doing like extra physical activities or where they're learning about their bodies. We didn't know that's also a sign of dyspraxia, which he is diagnosed very young, but he could have been diagnosed even at a younger age because he did have very obvious signs, because he does have a more severe case, at least as far as I've heard from other people that have dyspraxia. And so those were the warning signs that we had and just didn't realize. And currently, just for some people that are just getting this diagnosis or just now starting to get worried about your kid, just so you have like a realistic timeline of how these things happen, is it took us 6 months from being told he has a speech delay to get him into speech therapy. We're currently waiting to get him in to rule out autism. No one thinks he has autism because he's very social, but he does have a lot of warning signs, so it's just to rule it out. It's very unlikely he'll get that diagnosis. My husband and I think maybe some of his therapists are also convinced with us that he has OCD. So he's waiting for the psych eval to rule out autism and to diagnose with OCD. And we were warned for one place, it's a 9-month waiting list, where our pediatrician told us to go because they can be quicker. We've been waiting since he turned 2, and he's 2.5. So it's been 6 months that we've been waiting, and that's just to get an appointment. Last time I talked to him, which was about 2 weeks ago, they told me we were 3rd on the list to get called to make an appointment. It's not that fast. And then to get into the genetic counselor has been about 4 or 5 months, which is not bad for a genetic counseling appointment, because we had when we got my son's diagnosis of dyspraxia, my husband and I were also diagnosed with, well, I was diagnosed with dyspraxia. My husband wasn't there, but the specialist told us, based on what I had said, he most likely also had dyspraxia. We'd be in like the 10% that have moderate symptoms. It's not as obvious as my son's, but my husband and I both had some developmental things when we were children that were just kind of, when we were kids, it wasn't that big of a deal to have a little bit of a delay here and there. But we were told, in her experience, it's a dominant gene, and if one parent has it, then it's most likely that all the children would have it. In our case, since both of us have it, and with her experience it being dominant, it means our kids are kind of cursed. So we went to my OBGYN because we were planning another pregnancy at that time. And she told us we'd have to go to a pediatric genetic counselor to find out the cause of our sons, and then that would be able to tell us about our other children. So we actually just went in last week, literally a week from today, and went into the genetic counselor, and they drew his blood. So we don't have the answers yet, but they're doing those tests now to see if they can find a genetic cause. So that took us 4 or 5 months, which isn't that bad. And then we're still waiting on the psych evals, which are pretty bad, and the speech evals took us a while. We were blessed with our hydrotherapy, though, because hydrotherapy, typically, we've heard crazy stories about getting into hydrotherapy and the cost of hydrotherapy. We were blessed by the fact that a big therapy company, Cora, bought one of these smaller therapy buildings. So the building was already there. They're in the process of switching over to Cora, which means they needed a new clientele. They didn't have any clientele. So they had all these openings. So we just snuck our way on in there. And so my son's been one of the only pediatric patients there for a while, and now more and more and more people are coming in, and he doesn't like not having the place to himself anymore. But we were extremely blessed to start physical therapy and hydrotherapy within a month of his diagnosis. And their price really is not insane. So we're blessed with that. But so just to summarize, now we do 3 speech therapy appointments a week a occupational therapy, a developmental therapy, a physical therapy, a hydrotherapy, and swim lessons. I hope I didn't get those mixed up there, but it ends up being 8 total with swim lessons. And just to anyone that's getting this diagnosis, time consuming, and you have to put a lot of work into the therapies. And like, I was amazed to find out that having my son in occupational therapy at this age can make it that he's never dyslexic when he gets older. And it's like, that's amazing to me that if you do enough crossing the midline at this age, dyslexia can be prevented, which is just insane. So the key is really to get diagnosed young, and my son was lucky to be diagnosed this young, but it is always possible to get diagnosed even younger. But I just hope this video can get to at least one family that can help you get through this process and know kind of how it goes. And hopefully this can get to somebody that didn't even know about dyspraxia, because I'm recording this October 8th, which is the week of dyspraxia awareness. I've never made a YouTube video and I've never edited, so this may take me a year to get out or something. But whenever this does get out, hopefully it can make someone aware, because dyspraxia does affect up to 10% of the population, which is astounding to know that statistic, and people don't know what dyspraxia is. And in that 10%, are all sorts of people that are just like clumsy. But then there's, the 2% of that where they're like my son, that have a lot more difficulties with what others would consider basic activities like talking. But I just hope someone out there can be helped, and thank you for listening to my son's story.